Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. You enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Luke Switkowski about the impact of the economic downturn on HR teams. Luke Switkowski, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the Boston area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the economy and the impact of the economic downturn generally, but also specifically as it relates to HR teams and what that means for organizations and their people management approaches in the coming year or two. As we get started, I wanted to share Luke's bio with everybody. With more than a decade of Workday experience and as a CEO and co-founder of Cognitive, Luke oversees sales and emerging services and products for Cognitive, most notably Rooster, a candidate scheduling platform that is fully integrated with Workday. Prior to co-founding Cognitive in 2016, Luke spent 5 years managing the Workday post-production practice at Meteorix, acquired by IBM. He holds a BS from Georgia Tech and has spent time growing up in Europe and in the Midwest and south of the U.S. It's a pleasure to have you. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
No, just that I've been in consulting all my life, and I guess you could call me a failed computer science major because I never got a programming job after college.
You know, some would say that's a failure because you didn't end up getting a job in your field of study. I think that's a silly argument personally. I think, there's lots of transferable and durable skills that we learn, in whatever we're studying. And as long as we're making a contribution, I think that's what's valuable. So anyways, congrats on all of your success. That's, again, a pleasure to have you. Why don't we just dive on in? And, everyone knows that we've just been dealing these last couple of years with a global pandemic and all the supply chain issues and all the labor force issues and the massive amounts of money that has been pumped into the system, a stimulus and to try to keep people afloat. And now we're dealing with a lot of inflation. All of this creates the context that we're currently in, where there's fear of recession. And depending on who you talk to, some people say we're already in a recession. Other people, try to kind of redefine what recession means and are saying something a little bit differently. But I don't think anyone can argue that we're not in a state of economic downturn and slowing despite a strong labor market. Right. So that's the interesting piece. And that's why some people are saying, no, it's not really a recession because it's a really strong labor market. And anyways, it's a really interesting thing. But regardless, the economic downturn is real. It's impacting organizations. They're struggling to find good people. They're struggling to pay and keep up with inflation. They're struggling, with all these different things related to, the challenges associated with a downturned economy. So what do you think are the biggest things we need to be paying attention to from an HR perspective within our organizations? And what does HR generally, kind of as a profession, think about the current business climate?
So I think what's going to happen is, because we're already seeing this, if you look at, let's say the layoffs that are happening at prominent companies, there's, a post on LinkedIn or in the news every day about, company, A, B, or C laying off its workforce. You sort of get the general kind of trend of, okay, first the talent acquisition team gets reduced in size, right? And then maybe marketing, right? Kind of the functions that, used to get all these people hired in the door, they're now going to get reduced because the need is, the projected need is not as high as it was in the past. And I think what that's going to do for HR teams, and I look at HR where talent falls under the function of HR as well, is I think we're going to go back a little bit to, let's say, maybe if I can call it the meat and potatoes of HR, where it's going to get refocused on operations, efficient operations, and basically the most efficient way to run an HR practice and team, if you will, as possible. Because it's when times are good, then they're really, really good, and it's really easy to initiate new let's say programs or initiatives within a company. They usually get a lot of support, but then when things start slowing down, everybody gets their pencils out and say like, okay, can we really continue to afford to do X, Y, and Z, as a company? And so I think from an HR perspective specifically, clients are not going to be turning off payroll systems, recruiting systems, or anything like that. But I think some of the impact that you will see is for, let's say, these talent applications out there that let's say give you the kind of, let's say, the extra toppings on top of your talent acquisition stack sundae, if you will. I think those might be looked at seriously in terms of, okay, are we getting really a return on our investment here? And I think the really tough part about it is HR departments, which are obviously involved in things like layoffs or workforce reductions or reorganizations, they're going to look at their tech stack and it's like, hey, do we really need these three systems, or can we reduce the usage of those systems and maybe save a few jobs here and there in exchange? So I think from even like a CHRO perspective, I think the focus will be operational efficiency, kind of first, second, and third. And then I think in addition to that, it's going to be put in the context of kind of this new world of semi-remote or fully remote as well, because it's no longer one office building with a bunch of people in it.
And I'm curious, I mean, how people have disagreement about using the term recession, but do you feel like we're in a recession? Are we entering a recession? I think one thing's clear is that if it is a recession, it's different than what we typically, some aspects of it are a little bit different than what we typically see in a recession. Yep. Anyways, how would you look at it?
I think, maybe I would not be betting 100%, today to say like we're in a recession today, but I think a month from now it'll be confirmed that we are in one. So, I just, to me, what I see kind of on the ground as far as let's say our business is concerned and just what's happening out there in the workforce is there's a tremendous amount of contraction happening, whether people realize it immediately or not, and I just don't see that there'll be no consequence from that, right? So it would be kind of silly to say like, okay, there's all these companies, having reductions in workforce, and then you see an article where like Walmart just basically pulled out out of billions of dollars of supplier commitments, right? Because they're reducing costs, and retailers are saying that the stockpiles of inventory overflowing, right? So to kind of ignore that there's going to be nothing to worry about in like 3 to 4 weeks, I think is a little foolish. So, I think if we're not already, in a recession, we'll definitely be in one. But that's not necessarily to say it's like an awful thing, because, the economy goes through recessions all the time. It's maybe a time for optimization. I think probably the biggest impact, probably right now, that we see, especially, for clients running the Workday system, is the most critically impacted companies are the ones that were funded by VCs and PE firms, as startups, and these, let's say, future unicorn or multi-billion-dollar companies, right, that they all want them to be. The fact that the funding is getting scrutinized at a level that it's never been scrutinized before, because before it was really easy to get a startup funded. Just a year and a half, 2 years ago, it was, you could get a term sheet and it seems like, 5 minutes, depending who you talk to and depending on your network. I think that's going to get scrutinized tremendously today. And, a lot of those companies got, big enough to, purchase something like Workday or Salesforce or whatever. And, the fact that they've never been profitable, that will come into question at some point, right? Because at some point you run out of cash. You have just so much runway. And so the contraction will probably be the most severe there. And then I think for, established companies, like let's say the Walmarts, Targets of the world, I think they'll be just fine, just like they've been fine through every other recession. And they won't be as disproportionately impacted as, let's say, the funded companies. But, I think we're going to be seeing greater and greater impact over time.
We don't know exactly what that impact will be, but what we typically see in HR is, like you said, tightening of the belt. We see configuring things, questioning what things are actually necessary. I think all of that is actually healthy to go through periodically, because we need to prune back things. We need to prune back systems. We need to prune back, policies, practices, and procedures that maybe once served a purpose, but over time they just propagate, and then you end up just burdened under all these things. And so I think all of that needs to happen. It's spurred on by a recession, or organizations just kind of do it proactively themselves anyways. So from that standpoint, I think it's actually a good, healthy thing for organizations to go through that sometimes painful but necessary exercise. I'm wondering what you think about the use of technologies. You've referred to the various technological stacks that organizations use, and we might need to reevaluate if those are actually giving us what we need. But technology also is a way to respond to the downturns and the recession as we find ourselves there, or regardless of what people want to call it. So how can technology help us with economic uncertainty, regardless of how we decide to frame it overall?
Yeah, I think it can do it in a couple of ways that just come to mind right away. So one is, what technology allows you to do in general is to leverage out a capability, or to just leverage yourself to a greater extent and do more than one person can do, right? So a person not using technology is going to be able to do way less than a person using a technology for their job to be more efficient in their job. But I think the other benefit of technology is, when you are in an unfortunate situation of reducing a team or whatever, technology is what can stay in place and keep your processes in place without really impacting the overall way you run an HR department or your business, because the process are not dependent on the people, right? The process is embedded in the system, and the system kind of, let's say, remembers, right, what the process is, and therefore the disruption is maybe, it's not fully mitigated, but it's definitely better than, somebody who has, let's say, all the institutional knowledge within themselves, going for another job or whatever. And then you're kind of stuck, right? Coming to kind of dig yourself out of it by kind of redoing everything that they've learned over the time. And with technology, it allows you to capture that process, right? So if you look at Workday, for example, everything is defined by a business process. In Workday, it's just actors and initiators of processes. So it doesn't matter who's doing the process is always the same. If you look at, a technology like we've developed Rooster, which is for interview scheduling, a single coordinator can schedule hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews a month. And, it requires way less, manpower to execute on that. And then because it's templated and because the candidate experience is the same, if something happens and that person leaves, or they have to be reduced as part of a reduction in force or something, then everything else stays in place. So the next person coming in is going to be able to execute, or the remaining individuals are going to be able to execute on the tasks, and then it won't have a huge company-wide impact. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that's one of the things that, frankly, if you look at, let's say, over the last 10 years, this transition to cloud, right? And even if you look at Cognitive's history when it started, the fact that, I don't know if you're familiar with Gusto for payroll, but it's a phenomenal system. And if you're starting a company and you're like 1 to 5 people, get Gusto, right? I mean, it allows you to do everything remotely. you have to set everything up in the system, and if your bookkeeper, leaves the company or your accountant's unavailable, you don't have to worry about that, right? Because it's all in the system. You can reference it all and continue to use it. So I think that's technology is going to be here to stay, and it's going to help companies kind of get through, let's say, a downturn. But not all technology, obviously, right? Like, so the nice to have technologies, I think, will be the ones that will be looked at very seriously and with a lot of scrutiny. Because at the end of the day, why do you buy technology as a company, right? You buy it because you want some kind of positive business impact, and when that gets harder and harder to justify, then you have to look at things from a serious lens, if you will, and ask yourself, okay, do I continue to use this specific piece of technology where I'm having a hard time measuring the positive business impact, in the current state of the economy?
You've already kind of referred to this a bit, but more explicitly, what should HR leadership, so the CHROs, HR directors over various functional areas, what should we be thinking about, and how should we shift our strategic thinking over the next year to 2 years in response to the economic conditions that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think one of the most important things that you have to do kind of constantly, and maybe you double down on this in the short term, is really identify key team members within your organization that are in critical roles, that are, let's say, top employees, right? And make sure that everything is being done to take care of them. And then also to have a proper succession plan if something were to happen and, let's say their name doesn't make it on a spreadsheet because there's a company-wide reduction of whatever, right? I've seen this happen where, large companies especially, they'll say like, okay, we need to reduce our workforce by 5%. And it's done more so by math than anything, let's say, super specific, right? They'll just say, okay, each department needs to reduce by X amount of percent. Well, I think what you have to have in place is really almost like a pre-identification of like, hey, here are key people, key roles, because what you don't want to do is accidentally, either eliminate a job or, let's say, shift someone from one department to the next, and then find out that they were the only ones that could do a certain function, right? So I think kind of doubling down on your, let's say, human capital within the world of HR is going to be really important. And I think also keeping an eye on actual inflation and how that's going to impact the merit cycle next year, right? So, every year companies give base pay increases, right? And if inflation is super high, but you only give, like, let's say 1% increases to your employees, then I think that puts you at risk for, possible attrition. And I think being really close to that process and really focusing on it will be very, very important.
It's hard. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to be coming around the corner. We don't know if there's going to be another pandemic. Maybe monkeypox becomes the next big thing. Who knows, right? But we know that something will come around the corner because there's always something. And so we just plan the best we can for uncertainty. And I think if we can create a culture of agility and continual learning, then we're probably, as an organization, going to be more resilient and better capable of, responding to whatever the new circumstance might be and whatever is causing the economic downturn. Yeah. We always go through these cycles. It always happens. You can almost guarantee it. And so whether we're going through a recession now or somehow we end up not having the downturn everyone's expecting, and it comes a few years from now, like, it's going to happen. It just always happens because economies are cyclical. And so we just have to be prepared regardless of what the reason and the cause of it is. I guess
I'll just add one more thing to that.
Go ahead.
Just really quick. One of the things that the pandemic did in terms of businesses, it accelerated the move to the cloud, right? That's why you saw all these cloud companies really, growth accelerated all across the board, whether even it's something simple as Zoom, right? Where your move to the cloud is just for video conferencing only, right? But what that's done too is by forcing all these companies to go to the cloud because of a remote workforce, I think that move will also help them get through the next couple of years if it does get tough, because they will have systems and they will have systems of record and capabilities from a technology perspective that will let them manage this in a much better way than, again, being dependent on an office where everybody shows up every day, and let's say a lot of cloud-based technology is not used. So it's almost like the pandemic almost like prepped everyone a little bit from a technology perspective for the future uncertainty, to your point.
Last question as we start to wrap things up. Because of this uncertainty, we need to be paying attention, to kind of forecasting and giving forethought towards what the future might look like. That requires reskilling and upskilling and just making sure that we have the skills necessary. Why is it so important, though, that we continue to hire for why do we need to continue to focus on reskilling and upskilling? Why is it still so hard to hire for certain skills despite being, a really strong labor market? We talk about there being such low unemployment. There's so many options for people, yet there's still huge gaps in certain aspects of the economy.
Yeah, I think to that point, the world changes very quickly now, and what was, let's say, a hot skill 20 years ago is totally different today. So as new technologies emerge in new industries, right? And you can even look at like the electric car manufacturing industry. It was not even a thing 10 years ago. Now every car manufacturer is looking for engineers, for programmers, for anybody that knows anything about electricity and cars together, right? And it's a whole new industry. It's happening kind of all at once. So so the reason why kind of upskilling and reskilling is important is that the amount of time that will pass before, let's say, another big industry pops up, I think will continue to, let's say, shrink, right? So it won't be something like, we've just invented rail and now trains are going to be a big thing for the next like 50 to 100 years, right? Those windows will be shorter. So the reskilling will be more important. But also you have to kind of look at just trends overall and see where industries are going and what makes sense to do, personally from a skills perspective. So obviously, if I'm like, if let's say I want to get into the automotive industry today, I would not want to work on probably combustion cars, because I know that at some point in time, those will go away, and probably all the interesting things to learn and all the kind of upside in terms of industry growth is probably in electric cars. Just even though they're only 5% of the market today, right? It's not going to be 5% of the market 10 years from now. I can guarantee you that it's going to be much more than that. So, kind of paying attention to that, and then just understanding that, I guess rightfully or wrongfully, the world is changing at a faster pace. It requires us to adapt a little bit more quickly sometimes too.
Good. Very good, Luke. It has been a pleasure talking with you. I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute, but before we wrap things up for today, I just want to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Sure. So you can find me, on LinkedIn. There's only one Luke Switkowski probably on there, not a lot of us. You can also email me at Luke, Luke, at cognitiveinc.com. That's KOGNITIVINC.com. And the final word for today, as far as I'm concerned, is that I think in the end everything will be okay. I think people will adapt and make the best of the uncertain times, and I wouldn't be surprised if something new and exciting doesn't emerge over the next couple of years that we'll be able to look at in a positive way, in a positive light, and not feel down so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Luke. It's been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Luke and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page. And please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.